The sound that changes your life isn't always a bang. Sometimes it's a thrum, a deep, resonant hum that starts in your bones before you even register it with your ears. It's the sound of 4 Allison T56 turboprop engines churning the quiet North Carolina night into a thick soup of impending chaos. But that sound comes at the end of our story. To understand how a man can go from sipping coffee on his porch to coordinating a combat-style airdrop over his own backyard, you have to start where it all began. With a slice of heaven, a custom-built mailbox, and the arrival of a woman who thought the world was her personal subdivision to regulate. My heaven has a name: Liberty Landing. It's not much, just a 500-foot strip of meticulously manicured grass carved into the rolling hills of rural North Carolina. But it's mine. I'm Jack Miller, and while most guys my age buy a Corvette when they hit their midlife crisis, I bought a runway. It's like a Corvette, really, except it's bigger, straighter, and the only way you're getting a ticket on it is if you forget to file a flight plan with your wife, Jen. I'm not some trust fund baby playing aviator. I spent my 20s as an Air Force loadmaster, kicking pallets out the back of C-130S over places you've never heard of. When I got out, I took that practical knowledge and designed a line of ridiculously successful over-engineered outdoor gear. The kind of stuff that survives falls from 10,000 feet because, well, I had some experience in that department. The company did well enough that Jen and I could buy this 100-acre plot of paradise, build our dream house, and, most importantly, clear that perfect strip of land. My morning routine was a kind of religion. I'd be out on the porch before the sun, coffee mug in hand, watching the mist burn off the fields. I'd walk the length of the runway, checking for any debris, a fallen branch, a stray rock, that could ruin a perfectly good tire. I'd check the windsock, a bright orange beacon of purpose against the deep green of the pines. It was a ritual of peace, a quiet communion with the sky. The community fit the landscape. It was a live and let live sort of place, populated by farmers whose families had worked this land for generations, a few other small business owners, and old-timers who seemed to have been born on their front porches. We waved when we passed on the gravel roads. We helped each other pull trucks out of the mud during spring storms. We minded our own business. It was a simple, unwritten code, and it worked. "Think we can get that new wiring done by Friday, Earls?" I asked one Tuesday morning. Earl, my contractor, was a local institution. He was a tall, wiry man who communicated in a language of grunts, nods, and the occasional nugget of profound, common-sense wisdom. He was helping me upgrade the hangar from a simple shelter to a proper workshop. He paused his work, shifted the wad of tobacco in his cheek, and let loose a stream of brown liquid that hit a dandelion with pinpoint accuracy. "Reckon so?" he grunted. "Unless a pig learns to fly and crashes into the substation. Even then, probably." That was Earl. Reliable, unflappable, and possessed of a beautifully practical worldview. Life was good. The business was thriving. My Piper cub was purring like a kitten in the hangar, and the biggest problem on my horizon was deciding what color to paint the new hangar doors. I should have known it was too good to last. The universe, like an HOA president, abhors a vacuum of drama. The harbinger of doom wasn't a thunderclap or a swarm of locusts. It was a "for sale" sign on the adjacent 20-acre property, the one belonging to old Mr. Henderson, who'd finally retired to Florida. For weeks it sat there, a silent neighbor. Then, one day, a "sold" sticker was slapped across it, as final as a gavel. A few days later, the real omen appeared. A pristine, white Lexus SUV. It looked fundamentally allergic to the gravel road it was navigating, picking its way between potholes with the pained delicacy of a debutante in a mud pit. I was out checking my fence line when it pulled to a stop. The driver's side door opened, and out stepped a woman. She had a haircut you could set your watch to, a helmet of blonde hair so perfectly coiffed it looked like it had been sculpted from a single, unyielding block of butter. Her smile was bright, white, and completely devoid of warmth. It didn't reach her eyes, which were scanning my property with the cool, appraising gaze of a health inspector. This, I would soon learn, was Carol Wetherington. Her husband, Bob, unfolded himself from the passenger seat. He was a quiet, beaten-down-looking man, with the slumped shoulders of someone who had long ago lost the will to argue. He just looked like he wanted to find a spot to set up a grill and be left alone. "Hello there," Carol called out, her voice a little too loud for the quiet, country air. "We're your new neighbors." "Welcome to the neighborhood," I said, offering a friendly nod. "I'm Jack. This is my place." Carol's eyes fixed on Liberty Landing. "Oh, an airstrip. How quaint." The word hung in the air, dripping with condescension. "Is that for, model airplanes?" "Nope. The real kind," I said, keeping my tone even. "I find they get you places faster." "Of course," she said with a forced little laugh. "It must be so loud, though. We moved from Charlotte for the peace and quiet, the tranquility." There it was. The first shot across the bow, disguised as a pleasantry. I glanced at Bob, who gave me a look of what I could only describe as preemptive apology before becoming intensely interested in a patch of clover near his feet. Over the next few days, I'd see Carol outside, pointing at things on my property while talking to Bob. I couldn't hear the words, but the body language was clear. She pointed at my fence, a sturdy but weathered split-rail fence that had been there for 30 years. She gestured toward my hangar, a practical, metal-sided building that I found beautiful in its utility. I even saw her squinting at my windsock. I brushed it off. City folk, I figured. They just needed time to adjust to the fact that not everything out here was designed by a landscape architect. I was wrong. She wasn't adjusting. She was assessing, planning, preparing for a hostile takeover. The first letter arrived a week later. It wasn't a friendly note or a welcome basket. It was a crisp, cream-colored envelope with a professionally printed return address. Oak Creek Farms Property Owners Association. I barely knew we had an HOA. It was some relic from the original developer, a toothless organization that collected $50 a year to maintain the little wooden sign at the entrance to our collection of gravel roads. I'd never received a letter from them before. Inside, on thick, intimidating letterhead, was my first official notice of violation. The president's name was printed at the bottom. Carol Wetherington. "Dear property owner," it began. "A recent review of the Oak Creek Farms community has identified a violation of the covenants, conditions, and restrictions, CC and Rs, on your property located at 112 Liberty Lane. My violation? My mailbox. It was a custom job, a point of pride. I'd spent a weekend crafting it from the propeller of a decommissioned crop duster I'd bought for scrap. It was polished, mounted on a sturdy post, and, I thought, a tasteful nod to my passion. According to Carol, it was not of a pre-approved design or material as per Article 4, Section 2 of the Community Bylaws. I was to replace it with a standard black, post-mounted mailbox within 14 days or face a fine of $25 per day. I stood there, staring at the letter, then at my beautiful propeller mailbox. I walked inside and handed the letter to Jen. She read it, her eyebrows climbing higher with every word. "A propeller mailbox? Seriously, that's what she's starting with?" "It's a declaration of war, Jen," I said, a strange sense of clarity washing over me. "You don't lead with your best weapon. You test the defenses with a pea shooter. The mailbox is the pea shooter." My suspicions were confirmed a few days later when I ran into Earl at the local hardware store. He looked miserable. "Working on the Wetherington's new deck," he grumbled, tossing a box of screws into his cart. "Worst job I've had in 20 years. That bad, huh? Bad doesn't cover it, he said, lowering his voice. That woman, she gave me a 3-ring binder. A binder, Jack. It's got acceptable decibel levels for my power tools, a list of approved paint swatches for my sawhorses. And she watches me, from the window, like a hawk. He shook his head. And that ain't the worst of it. She took over the HOA. How? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Staged a coup, Earl said. Called a meeting last month. Only 3 people showed up. Her husband, and Old Man Henderson's nephew, who was just there to hand over the keys. She nominated herself for president. Bob seconded it, and the nephew abstained. Bam! She's the queen now, and she's been digging through those old bylaws like a squirrel digging for nuts. The pea shooter had been fired. I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the cannons were coming next. The letters started arriving with the regularity of a metronome. It was like Carol had a full-time job finding new and inventive ways to declare my entire existence a violation of her newly weaponized bylaws. First, it was the hangar. It was now an unapproved agricultural outbuilding. I sent back a copy of my property deed from 10 years ago, showing the hangar was there long before she was, along with a polite note suggesting she check the county records. The response was a second letter, this time citing its color, a standard barn red, as inharmonious with the surrounding natural palette. Next, my classic 1978 Ford pickup. I loved that truck. It was rusted in all the right places and ran like a dream. To Carol, it was a commercial vehicle and could not be parked in view of the road. I pointed out that it was registered as a personal antique vehicle. She replied with a blurry photo of a shovel in the truck bed, claiming it was evidence of commercial use. But the masterpiece, the one that made me laugh out loud in sheer disbelief, arrived on a Tuesday. I was cited for excessive ground resonance. It took me a minute to even figure out what that meant. She was fining me for the sound of my Piper Cub's engine as I taxied from the hangar to the runway. I sat at my desk, reading the letter to Jen. Failure to maintain aesthetic turf consistency. I'm not making this up, it's right here. She's citing me because the grass on the runway is a different species than the grass in my lawn. Does she want me to land a plane on Kentucky bluegrass? Does she think I mow my runway with a nail clipper and a level? Jen just shook her head, a mixture of amusement and concern on her face. Jack, this woman is unhinged. She's not unhinged, Jen. She's a tyrant. There's a difference. Unhinged is chaotic. This is methodical. Normally, I would have found the whole thing hilarious, a story to tell my buddies. But the timing couldn't have been worse. My company had just landed the biggest contract of its existence. We were building a series of custom long-range surveillance drones for a world-renowned documentary crew. Their mission? To capture the first-ever high-definition footage of snow leopard cubs in the Himalayas. The project was my baby. I'd designed the drones myself, lightweight, whisper-quiet, with a battery life that was damn near revolutionary. The profit was massive, enough to set us up for life, but the deadline was carved in stone. The crew was heading to Nepal in 3 weeks, and they needed my drones. Any delay would cost me a fortune in penalty clauses and, worse, damage my company's hard-won reputation. Everything was on schedule, except for one final, critical component. A shipment of proprietary gyroscopic stabilizers. They were being made by a tiny, genius-run lab in a remote part of Oregon, and they were the secret sauce that allowed my drones to fly steady in the brutal mountain winds. They were fragile, priceless, and had to be flown in by a specialty charter plane that was equipped to handle them. A plane that was scheduled to land at Liberty Landing in 2 weeks. I looked out my office window, past the offending mailbox and the non-compliant pickup truck, to my beautiful, peaceful runway. It wasn't just a hobby anymore. It was a vital part of my supply chain. And Carol Weatherington was pointing all of her regulatory artillery right at it. The first real shot was fired on a Thursday night. I was guiding in a small charter, a Cessna 206 carrying a shipment of carbon fiber components. It was a routine night landing, something I'd done 100 times. My runway lights were on. Low-intensity, FAA-compliant edge lights, shielded so they were only visible on final approach. They cast a gentle, reassuring glow, a string of pearls against the black velvet of the night. The plane landed smoothly, taxied into the hangar, and I was helping the pilot unload when the blue and red lights washed over us. A sheriff's department SUV was rolling up my driveway. Out stepped Sheriff Brody, a man I'd known for years. He was a good cop, a local guy who understood the rhythms of the county. Tonight, he looked tired. He sighed, rubbing his temples like he was trying to ward off a migraine. "Jack," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "I got a call about an unauthorized and dangerously illuminated aircraft operation at this address." I gestured at the Cessna, now quiet in the hangar. "Brody, you know I've been landing planes here for 10 years. You've been to my 4th of July barbecue." "I know," he said, kicking at a piece of gravel. "The caller, a Miss Carol Weatherington, seemed to think you were guiding in a UFO for a hostile takeover. Her words, not mine." He let out a long, slow breath. "She also mentioned something about unregulated light pollution and a violation of the Natural Dark Sky Ordinance of Oak Creek Farms." "The what?" "Brody, there's no such thing as a dark sky ordinance here. She made that up." "I know that, and you know that, but she's got the HOA bylaws, and she was quoting them to the 911 dispatcher like she was reading from the Constitution. Just try to keep it down?" "It's a plane, Brody," I said, my frustration starting to boil over. "It makes plane noises. What do you want me to do, attach a giant silencer to it?" "Just handle it, Jack," he said, climbing back into his SUV. "My ulcer can't take much more of this." I watched him drive away, the flashing lights disappearing down the road. This was a new level. She was done with letters. She was now actively using emergency services to harass me. The stakes had just been raised considerably. I looked at the hangar, the runway, the tools of my trade and my passion, and I realized they were all under threat. My Himalayan contract, my company's future, was in serious jeopardy if my supply line could be severed by a single, malicious 911 call. The email arrived the next morning. Notice of emergency HOA meeting. The subject was Community Safety and Aesthetic Preservation. The time was 7 p.m. Monday night, to be held at the small, dusty community clubhouse that hadn't been used for anything other than storing old Christmas decorations in years. The sole agenda item: a discussion and vote on a proposed amendment to the bylaws concerning non-essential, high-intensity exterior lighting. She wasn't even trying to be subtle. I spent the weekend preparing for battle. I gathered my property deeds, FAA regulations on private airstrips, and printouts of the existing HOA bylaws, which said absolutely nothing about lighting beyond a vague clause about nuisances. I wrote out a calm, logical, carefully worded speech about private property rights, pre-existing use, and federal aviation safety standards. I was ready. Monday night, I walked into the clubhouse. The air was thick with the smell of mothballs and Carol's lavender-scented air freshener. It was, as I expected, a kangaroo court. Carol and Bob were there, sitting at a folding table at the front of the room. She had a gavel, an actual gavel, and she had rallied her troops, 2 other newcomer couples who had moved in over the past year. They sat together, looking nervous, like they'd been summoned for jury duty in a country they didn't understand. The only other person there was Dale, an old farmer from down the road, who was already half asleep in a metal folding chair. The vote was a foregone conclusion. Me and Dale versus Carol's terrified coalition. Carol banged her ridiculous gavel. "This emergency meeting of the Oak Creek Farms Property Owners Association is now in session," she announced, her voice echoing in the small room. She launched into a dramatic speech about light pollution and the need to preserve the rural nighttime character of our community. She talked about the stars and the fireflies, painting a picture of my runway lights as some kind of demonic industrial blight upon the landscape. When it was my turn, I stood up and delivered my calm, logical speech. "These are FAA-compliant, low-intensity runway edge lights," I explained, holding up the manufacturer's spec sheet. "They are shielded to only be visible on approach. They are not a nuisance. They are a critical safety feature for any legal, registered airstrip like mine." Carol smiled that cold, reptilian smile. "They are a garish, urban intrusion on our pastoral landscape, Mr. Miller. This isn't LAX. This is Oak Creek Farms. We have fireflies, not floodlights." She made the motion to amend the bylaws. Her motion was specific and clearly written by someone who had spent hours poring over the documents. It proposed a new rule. All non-essential high-intensity exterior lighting must be extinguished between sunset and sunrise. And then came the kill shot, a definition section that specifically classified runway or airstrip lighting of any kind as high intensity. The motion was seconded by one of the nervous husbands. Carol called for a vote. "All in favor?" 4 hands went up immediately. Carol's, Bob's, who looked like he was in physical pain as he raised his, and the other 2 couples. "All opposed?" I raised my hand. Dale snorted in his sleep next to me. "The motion passes 4-1, Carol declared, banging her gavel with a triumphant finality. "The new bylaw is effective immediately." I walked out into the cool night air, my blood boiling. I looked up at the stars she claimed to be protecting. She hadn't won a victory for the fireflies, she had won a victory for spite. And in doing so, she had just cut the throat of my business. I spent the next night stewing in my office, staring out the window at my now dark and useless runway. The little lights, my string of pearls, were extinguished. It felt like a part of my property had died. Across the field, a single smug light burned in Carol's house. I imagined her in there, sipping tea, basking in the glow of her petty triumph. My phone rang, shrill in the quiet room. It was a number from Oregon. My heart leaped into my throat. "Jack? It's Mark, from Aerostabilizers," the voice on the other end said, cheerful and oblivious. "Got some good news for you. We finished the final calibration on your gyros ahead of schedule. The units are perfect. We had a weather window open up, so we were in the air. Packed everything up and took off an hour ago. Should be over your place in about, 3 hours. The world tilted on its axis. My blood ran cold. 3 hours? I choked out. "Mark, what time is it there?" Just after 4 p.m. We should be wheels down at your strip around 10 p.m. your time. Hope that's not too late." It was too late. It was a death sentence. "Mark, we have a problem," I said, my voice tight. "A huge problem. You can't land here tonight." I quickly explained the situation. The HOA, the new bylaw, the mandatory blackout. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. "You're kidding, right?" Mark finally said. "This is a joke." "I wish it were." "No lights, no landing, Jack," he said, his voice instantly shifting from cheerful supplier to professional pilot. "I'm not putting my plane and my co-pilot at risk trying to find a strip of unlit grass in the middle of the night. It's against regulations, it's against our insurance policy, and frankly, it's insane. I can divert to Raleigh-Durham, but the parts won't get to you for at least 2 days with the time it takes to offload, get them through cargo handling, and find a courier. 2 days. The documentary crew was leaving for Nepal in 3. Factoring in the time I needed to install and test the stabilizers, 2 days was too late. The contract had a penalty clause that would not only wipe out every dime of profit, but would put my company deep in the red. My reputation would be shot. "There has to be another way," I pleaded. "Not from up here, there isn't," Mark said, his voice sympathetic but firm. "Sorry, Jack. Raleigh-Durham it is, unless you can pull a miracle out of your hat in the next 3 hours." He hung up. I was trapped. I stared out the window at the oppressive darkness, at the single light in Carol's house, and I felt a wave of helpless rage wash over me. She had won. With a petty bylaw and a 4-to-1 vote, she had sabotaged my business, my dream, my future. I paced the hangar like a caged animal. I kicked a toolbox, sending wrenches skittering across the concrete floor with a satisfying metallic clatter. I yelled at the silent, sleeping form of my Piper cub. I yelled at the sky. The hangar door slid open, and Jen stood there, silhouetted against the porch light, holding 2 sweating bottles of beer. She didn't say anything. She just walked over, handed one to me, and leaned against the wing of the plane. She let me vent. I told her everything. The call, the deadline, the penalty clause, the smug light in Carol's window. I raged about the injustice, the sheer unadulterated pettiness of it all. When I finally ran out of steam, my throat raw, Jen took a slow sip of her beer. "So there's no way to get the shipment?" she asked quietly. "No other airport? Can't you drive to Raleigh?" "Not in time," I said, my voice cracking. "It's a big crate, Jen, a delicate one. It needs to be brought here, to the workshop. It needs to be dropped from the sky." I said it as a lament, a cry of pure frustration. But the moment the words left my mouth, something shifted in the air. Jen's head tilted. A slow smile, mischievous and brilliant, spread across her face. "Dropped from the sky?" she repeated, her eyes twinkling. "Jack, are you thinking what I think you're thinking?" A wild, desperate, and utterly glorious idea began to form in my mind, pushing aside the anger and despair. It was insane. It was impossible. It was perfect. A slow smile of my own began to form. "Get me my old phone," I said, my voice filled with a newfound energy. "The one with the weird contacts, the black one at the bottom of my desk drawer." A minute later she was back, holding up the ancient, brick-like satellite phone I hadn't touched in a decade. I scrolled through a short list of contacts, names from a different life. I passed Frosty, Gator, and Wizard, until I found the one I was looking for. "Sully, do not call unless world is ending." Close enough, I thought. I pressed the call button. It rang once, twice, then connected with a crackle of static. A voice like gravel in a blender answered. "This better be good, Miller. I'm watching a documentary about cheese." "Sully, it's Jack," I said, my heart pounding. "How's your night-flying currency in a C-130 Hercules?" There was a long pause on the other end. Why?" "I need you to airdrop a pallet of sensitive electronics into a field in rural North Carolina," I said, the words feeling both absurd and sublime. "In about 2.5 hours." Sully was silent for so long I thought the call had dropped. Then I heard a low chuckle. "This is about a woman, isn't it? It always is." "Worse," I said, leaning against the hangar wall, a giddy sense of destiny washing over me. "It's about an HOA." The silence this time was even longer. Then a deep, booming laugh erupted from the phone, a sound so full of pure, unadulterated joy that I had to hold the receiver away from my ear. "An HOA?" Sully roared. Miller, that is the most American sentence I have ever heard. Send me the coordinates. This one's on the house. I'm logging it as unconventional terrain familiarization training. The game was on. The next hour was a blur of controlled, adrenaline-fueled chaos. Operation Petty Drop was a go. My first call was to Earl. I caught him just as he was sitting down to watch the game. "Earl, I need you. It's an emergency," I said, trying to sound as serious as possible. "What's wrong? Somebody stuck in a ditch? Cow have a calf backwards?" "Worse. I need to piss off my neighbor, and I need your help to do it in the most spectacular way imaginable." I explained the plan. There was a moment of stunned silence on the line. Then, he let out a low whistle. "You're gonna parachute a box into your own yard to stick it to the Witch of Oak Creek?" he asked, his voice filled with reverence. "Jack, I'll be there in 10 minutes. Just tell me what to do." He was my ground crew. While I was on the sat phone with Sully, coordinating the flight path and the nature of the cargo, Earl was a whirlwind of activity. We needed to mark the drop zone, the DZ. The field next to the runway was perfect, flat, open, and with a clear line of sight. But how to mark it in the dark without violating Carroll's lighting ordinance? My truck's headlights were technically legal as a vehicle, not exterior lighting. We aimed them across the field, creating a broad stage. Then came the genius stroke. "The bylaw says high-intensity exterior lighting," Earl mused, stroking his chin. "It don't say nothing about ceremonial Polynesian lighting." 5 minutes later, we were raiding my back deck. We took the 4 big tiki torches I used for summer barbecues, filled them to the brim with citronella oil, and staked them out in a perfect 100 x 100-foot square. We ran reflective tape between them, creating a glowing perimeter. Our DZ was ready. My phone crackled again. It was Sully. "All right, Miller. Listen up. I'm in the air. Had to reroute a training flight. You didn't hear that from me. We're flying a C-130H. The crate is on a standard 463L pallet with a Type 5 airdrop platform. We'll be using a G-12 cargo parachute. It's big, it's green, you can't miss it." This was glorious. He was using a full-spec military airdrop system for my box of gyros. "We'll do one low pass, 500 feet AGL. That's above ground level," he continued, the professional loadmaster in him taking over. "Combat offload style. We'll be low, slow, and loud. Make sure your ground crew is clear of the DZ. This thing ain't heavy, but you don't want it landing on your head." "Ground crew is clear," I said, looking at Earl, who was now doing a little jig of excitement next to a tiki torch. "DZ is marked." "Good," Sully grunted. "ETA is 15 minutes. Get ready for the show." It was 10:15 p.m. The night was still and silent, the kind of deep country quiet that Carroll claimed to cherish. I stood by the DZ with Jen and Earl. Jen had a death grip on my arm, her face a mask of terrified excitement. Earl was practically vibrating. We could see the light on in Carroll's house, a single point of yellow in the darkness. She was probably watching TV, sipping her chamomile tea, completely unaware of the thunder that was about to break over her head. Then we heard it. It wasn't the friendly buzz of my Piper cub. It was a low, deep thrumming that grew steadily, a sound that resonated in your chest cavity. It was the sound of 4 Allison engines, 4,500 horsepower each, ripping a hole in the fabric of the night. I couldn't help but imagine the scene from Carol's perspective. Her teacup starts to rattle on its saucer. A subtle vibration shivers through the floorboards. She probably assumes it's my little plane, defying her precious bylaw. She goes to the window, ready to dial 911, and sees it. Not a little Cessna. Something else entirely. A monstrous shadow. Bigger than her house, blotting out the stars, descending from the sky like an angry god. Lights flashed on in every house in the neighborhood. Dogs started barking. The thrum grew into a ground-shaking roar. And then it was there. The C-130. It was a phantom, a massive, dark shape against the faintly glowing sky, impossibly low, impossibly huge. It filled our entire field of vision. The sound was a physical force, pressing in on us, shaking the very ground we stood on. It flew straight and level, wings steady, its navigation lights blinking with military precision. It was directly over my property. Over the deafening roar, I heard Earl scream, his voice filled with a kind of religious ecstasy. "Dear Lord in heaven, it's beautiful." The rear cargo door of the Hercules was open, a yawning black square in its belly. For a split second, we saw the silhouette of the pallet against the night sky. Then, it slid out, a dark shape detaching from a darker one. It plummeted for a heart-stopping second, a free-fall that seemed to last an eternity. Thwump! The sound was shockingly loud, a sudden sharp crack as the drogue chute pulled the main canopy from its bag. The massive green G-12 parachute blossomed open, a perfect, beautiful dome catching the faint starlight. The pallet, now swinging gently beneath its canopy, drifted down with an almost serene grace. It descended into the center of our tiki torch-lit square and landed with a soft, final whoomp. A perfect drop. The Hercules, its job done, didn't linger. The pitch of the engines changed, rising to a deafening crescendo. The plane banked hard to the left, a giant wing dipping in a final salute. Its navigation lights blinked a farewell, and it climbed steeply back into the night, the roar slowly fading, leaving behind a stunned silence and the gentle, ghostly rustle of a parachute in the breeze. For a moment, none of us moved. We just stared. Jen, Earl, and me, standing in a field next to a military-grade cargo pallet attached to a parachute, the smell of jet fuel and citronella hanging in the air. Then Earl let out a whoop of pure, unadulterated joy that echoed across the valley. Doors were opening all over the neighborhood. People were standing on their porches, pointing at the sky, then at my field. I saw a silhouette in Carol's doorway. It was her, frozen, her posture rigid with disbelief. Her jaw, I could only assume, was on the floor. As if on cue, the silence was shattered by a new sound. A siren. Sheriff Brody's SUV came screaming down my gravel road, lights flashing, kicking up a plume of dust. He skidded to a stop, the headlights pinning us like stage actors. Brody got out, his face a perfect mask of utter disbelief. He looked at the C-130, now just a distant blinking light. He looked at the massive parachute, its green silk draped over the crate in my field. He looked at the 4 tiki torches, still burning merrily. He looked at me. He took off his hat and slowly wiped his brow. "Jack," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "Sheriff," I replied, a wide smile spreading across my face. "Don't," he said, holding up a hand. "Just don't say a word." I couldn't help myself. "The bylaw says I can't have my runway lights on after sunset," I said, my voice calm and clear. "It says nothing about airdrops. I complied with the letter of the law." Brody stared at me. He looked over at Carol, who was now staggering across the field toward us, her mouth opening and closing but no sounds coming out. She looked like a fish out of water. He looked back at me, at the parachute, at the tiki torches. The corner of his mouth twitched. A slow grin spread across his face. He shook his head in weary admiration, keyed his radio, and spoke. "Dispatch, disregard. Situation here is handled." He paused. "Suspect is technically compliant." He got back in his car and drove away without another word. I walked over to my new shipment, the key to my company's biggest success, delivered by military-grade spite. I gave the cool, slick parachute a pat. Jen was laughing so hard she was crying, leaning against Earl for support. Earl was taking pictures with his phone, narrating the events for his future grandchildren. I looked over at Carol's house. Her light went out. Total unconditional surrender. I found the clasps on the crate and popped them open. Inside, nestled in custom-cut foam, were my gyroscopic stabilizers, perfectly safe and sound. I picked one up. It felt cool and heavy in my hand, a little piece of high-tech genius. I held it up, looked at the quiet, starry sky, and gave a silent thank you to Sully, wherever he was. The night was quiet again, perfectly, peacefully, and victoriously quiet.